Too hot.
Hello, and welcome to In the Studio Room with the chosen chimp. The wait is finally over. A brand new series of Doctor Who. Series 14, or Series 1, or Series 40. Anyway, in any case, the wait is finally over. Here we are. This is the first actual legitimate series of Doctor Who since Flux, if you indeed want to count that. No more specials, no more one-offs, no more standalones. A straight run-through of episodes delivered weekly, as is the normality of Doctor Who programming. Who watched it at midnight? I didn't. I watched it this morning, Saturday morning, nice and early with a fresh head. And it's interesting kind of getting the jump on Doctor Who like that. So that's a bit different. And in terms of normality, I think it's the last time I'm going to use that word to describe anything that goes on in this brand new series. We've all seen the trailers, we've all seen the stuff, all the dancing, all the fun, or the theatrics. This is definitely a whole different beast. Lots of interesting things to unpack here straight off the bat before the series even begins. I mean, who can believe that 10 years ago the opening to a series was a grumpy old man doctor going up against some equally moody Victorian clockwork robots? Seems like quite a far cry, doesn't it? Remember they made that balloon out of human skin. Anyway, before we go any further, I just want to stress that this is a review for Space Babies. I will be dropping my review for Devil's Cord in a separate video, which will be landing very shortly after this one. So check out my channel, it's coming soon. If you want to know my thoughts on Devil's Cord, go towards that if it's happened to have dropped by now. But this is specifically a review for Space Babies, and here we go. But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about the run-up to this new series. There has been a staggering amount of press. Cast Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson have really gone to town, quite literally, in promoting this new series, as has a one Mr. Russell T Davies, who has appeared in numerous articles and newspapers and TV interviews and this entire swathe of YouTube Zoom calls. There's loads and loads of press material, loads and loads of it. And Russell T has talked about all sorts of things. He's talked about the untimely demise of the BBC. He's come out in support of the Chibnall era. Again, he has speculated rather jovially as to what may happen to the retired 10th Doctor now that he's retired. 10th, 14. I think I've given up on numbers in anything involving Doctor Who. They're just misleading. But one of the interviews that interests me the most is probably the one that he did with BBC Breakfast back on the 23rd of April, where he made a declarative statement talking about how this new series was all about having fun. I mean, conclusively, that is Russell T Davies' specific manifesto for this new series, is having fun. A kind of antithesis for the dread and darkness that often occupies news and current affairs and just the real world in general. And that really shines through in the trailer. It's all about the fun, folks. However, in amongst all these millions of other press releases that he did, I also was quite intrigued by this interview he did with SFX magazine, where he says, and I quote, "Doctor Who Season 1 finale is the most devastating yet," says Russell T Davies. "Oh my God, you're gonna die." Every episode stands on its own. There will be a running theme and running story that's going to build and build and build to the most devastating finale. Literally the biggest finale ever. There's some shots of that in the trailers coming up. Oh my God, you're gonna die. Well, personally, for me, that's not specifically my idea of fun. But what is more interesting is that this seems to contrast his mission statement as declared on the BBC Breakfast interview. But of course it doesn't really. Of course you can have both. It's going to be consistently fun and pantomimish, and then you're going to get that intense Russell T Davies drop, which is one of the things that I've waffled on about since the beginning of his announcement as showrunner, that little injection of intensity that he is so good at. It's going to come up at some point, but in the meantime we've got these new episodes and we can expect all kinds of laughs and all kinds of chuckles and all kinds of mad silliness. And I'm up for it. I am game for it. This is a whole new product, a whole new Doctor Who, all these new different characters and all these new sparkly colours. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be a ride. So the question I've asked myself is, how am I going to objectively and subjectively give some intelligent commentary on these new episodes? I mean, your relationship with your fiction and your literature and your TV and your films and your games is very personal to you, and that is something that should shine through in your critiques, but there also is a wider responsibility to call things like they are and not to fall too heavily into recency bias, which might have slightly happened with The Giggle. My reviews of the anniversary specials were very subjective, and I am proud of that. But they seem to go against the grain of what a lot of people thought. I mean, I wasn't too won over by The Wild Blue Yonder initially, whereas the general consensus was that that was good. However, I thought The Giggle was an absolute blast, and the general consensus with that was that it was a little bit ropey and didn't really deliver on its promise. And whilst I stick by my criticisms, I also wonder if there is a bigger picture that I kind of missed when I was covering those, and so on, so forth. And here's what I decided. I decided when I watch each of these episodes, I am going to ask 2 questions. And I am going to base my critiques and my reviews on each of these episodes based on the response to these 2 questions. And here they are. The first question is, does the episode I'm watching have a clear and consistent personality of its own? Okay, I'll give you an example. Right, so Heaven Sent and Hell Bent. All you long-term Doctor Who fans know all about Heaven Sent and Hell Bent. It is generally accepted that Heaven Sent is one of the greatest standalone, one of the greatest episodes of Doctor Who of all time, and I am inclined to agree. I love it so much. It has a clear and consistent personality of its own because the thing that it goes into is the thing that it leaves with. It has one narrative running fluidly, and everything is based around this concept of the Doctor being trapped in this maze, in this castle, and then it builds and builds and builds into this glorious twist, this glorious climax, which is a sublime, clear, pure, consistent payoff to the established mystery in the beginning of that episode. By contrast, Hell Bent, the follow-up and the final episode of that particular series of Doctor Who, is widely accepted as one of the worst episodes of Doctor Who of all time. And I agree up until a point. I think the second part of it is one of the worst episodes of Doctor Who of all time. I think the first part of it is actually incredible because the Doctor finally lands on Gallifrey. He is finally squaring off with the Time Lords, and he does it in this gloriously chilled, kind of passive-aggressive fashion, and he breaks the ranks in the Time Lord army, squaring off in his own house by just using a couple of words and just a steely glare, and it's brilliant. The way that that episode unravels is everything that happens kind of after with Clara and the Shielder, and then in the end they're going around in space in the spinning diner, and you get the TARDIS reboot, and it's just like, hang on, what is, where, no. he finally lands on Gallifrey. It's the thing that was established right at the beginning of Doctor Who's revival. Him losing his planet, and finally, after everything that's happened, after all the battling and after all the stories of him getting the planet back, he's finally on there. And then it kind of segues into this weird plot point of him saying goodbye to Clara and Shielder, who is a character that nobody really remembers now, and then there's a diner spinning in space. Certainly did not have a clear and consistent personality of its own. The bottom line is, it was bad, messy, all over the place writing for an episode of Doctor Who to have a clear and consistent personality of its own. It needs to be just a neatly woven package of storytelling with a beginning and a middle and an end that makes sense, and you establish that groundwork, and then if you like, you find ways to bend those rules to make it interesting. But it needs to be a journey where the end is a payoff to what happens at the beginning, and the running themes need to remain consistent throughout. Otherwise, the audience will kind of get confused and annoyed, irrespective of the kind of Doctor Who episode that they are after. And that brings me to my second question: was I entertained? There is definitely no room for boredom or stagnancy in Doctor Who. There should be no point where you're sitting there going, this is just, and I think there are a couple of episodes in the past that get a little tied up and a little bogged down in faffing around, basically. I don't mean to dunk on this episode when everyone dunks on it all the time, but I think Orphan 55 is quite a good example of that, because it's just boring. It's just people kind of running from one place to another, and an elderly lady screaming about Benny, and I mean, that too wasn't particularly clear and consistent in its own personality, but also it was just a fundamentally very kind of placid and dull episode. And it's looking good for this series, right? Because all that stuff in the trailer, I think it's definitely going to be the polar opposite to boredom. So even if this is not the Doctor Who that I have grown up with, and even if it's not the Doctor Who that I've enjoyed through the revival years, I think I am going to thoroughly appreciate and enjoy everything this new series throws at me, provided that the answer to these two questions is yes. Does it have a clear and consistent personality of its own, and was I entertained? Okay, so here we go. Now that my super pretentious waffle is out the way, let's get into this. Space babies. So this episode kind of serves as a bit of a system reset for brand new fans of Doctor Who, which is very important. Doctor Who is a family show. It is for children. People my age or above can moan about that until the cows come home. It is for adults, it is for teens, it is for children. Children are people who are new, and therefore brand new series of Doctor Who have to have this kind of reset period to introduce new young audiences and new old audiences who are checking the show out for the first time, particularly as it has found this brand new lease of life in America on Disney+. Yes, it has always been transmitted in America right back in the day, as far as the Max Headroom thing happened in Horror of Fang Rock. Why am I talking about that now? But yeah, so introduction, it is the Doctor explaining to Ruby Sunday, just laying the groundwork. Okay, it's a TARDIS, it's bigger on the inside, it's a time machine, he is from Gallifrey, he doesn't have a home, he lost all his people. Again, it's still that, even though we got that all back at the end of that particular revival, because the Master went and destroyed it again during the Timeless Child arc. So he's back to square one. He should really be saying, I lost it twice, but we're just going to gloss over all that because it's exhausting. And then straight away we go into the butterfly effect skit, which we all knew was coming because we've seen it in the trailers. They travel to prehistoric dinosaur eras and she accidentally treads on the butterfly and becomes that insect-like creature. It's fun. It's enjoyable, it's funny. He rectifies it by blowing the butterfly a sort of blowy kiss. I kind of wonder if that's like the residual of his regeneration energy, maybe, or it's just something he can do now, or could the Doctor do that all along? Am I missing something there? Doesn't matter, it's fine. So they randomly punch in some dates, and the date that they randomly punch in is 21506. And they travel there and they're on a space station. It's a space station episode. They are on a space station now and they get chased by a monster which the Doctor is abnormally scared of. He takes a brief moment to look out the window and explains to Ruby Sunday that even though he is on his own, he is completely free of the burdens that most of us mere mortals are shackled with for our entire lives, having a job, working for a boss, paying taxes, all that stuff. And this is very reminiscent, I thought, of when Christopher Eccleston's Doctor looks out the window in the second episode of his first series with Rose Tyler. It's a sort of mirror image of that, but with the new Doctor and Ruby Sunday. And by the way, there are so many examples in this episode of their chemistry being superb. These young whippersnappers have very easily matched the charisma and the chemistry between David Tennant's Doctor and Catherine Tate's Donna Noble, which was one of the real shining elements of those three specials. These two new young people have smashed it. They are just so bursting with life and energy. It's looking good for the not boredom thing. Every scene they share together, they really bounce off each other. There just seems to be just a real kind of natural bounce between the two. So we are definitely off to a good start with that, and everything that happens to that has a real upbeat, adventurous tone to it, because within minutes of looking out of this window and talking about their respective lives and the adventures they're going to have, they realise that the ship is full of talking babies. It is a space baby adventure. There you go. They have grown into adults but stayed as babies, and the actual adult crew have gone away for reasons we find out in a bit. So the crew, they still retain their babiness. They are scared of boogeymen. They like playing with crayons and drawing on the walls, and they need hugs and to blow their noses. So the babies are working all the ship controls using all these cute little CBeebies gizmos that they have made, and yeah, the whole thing absolutely pongs of cuteness. It is extremely cute. It's a bunch of babies, isn't it? But there is something slightly more nefarious going on, because there is a robot nanny that is kind of guiding them and serving as a voice of guardianship on this space station, and it turns out that there is a person behind this controlling, and then the Doctor finds this person, and it's a human woman, the only adult left on the ship. She is an on-site mechanic who got left when all the adults basically abandoned ship, and the reason why they abandoned ship was due to a recession. The government cut funding for this project, so all the crew had to leave, but it was also illegal to shut down the baby farming program. So this baby farming had to carry on, even though there was nobody to look after the babies. And straight off the back of this is the concept that these babies are actually refugees because they are trying to find a home. This is elaborated on by the character Jocelyn, as she explained that the fate of all refugees is to land on somebody else's shores. This is strikingly relevant to current affairs. This is, of course, what Russell T Davies is very good at, and it wasn't until I watched the episode for the second time that I remembered that these reflective drops of the real world were in this episode. I think it's definitely something that is appropriate to Doctor Who to talk about these topics and to cover them and to show that they are a very real problem within a science fiction setting, it kind of sort of has a bearing on what goes on in the rest of the episode, but at the same time it seems a little out of place. As I will discuss later on, I think the themes of this episode are very tightly bound in themes of abandonment and not knowing who a person's family is, and this feeds into that. So for that reason it does most certainly have a place, but in terms of them being refugees, in terms of the government failing to look after children once they are born, I think these are more deserving of entire episodes unto their own, and therefore these little pops were just kind of jarring compared to everything else that was going on. I think they should have been covered in more detail in a separate landscape in another segment of Doctor Who, where they could have had more focus and more attention, because that's the only time in this that I think Russell T does a real reflection of today's society, because as we will discuss, the rest of the story is snot and farts. Anyway, she's hiding down there because she can't bear the thought of seeing the babies die. They are running out of oxygen, the space station isn't going anywhere, the pipes are hissing, they haven't worked out why yet, and yeah, baby Eric is trying to fight the boogeyman because... Boogeyman? Oh no, that's the devil's cord. Sorry. Bogeyman, and he can't because he's a baby, and that's crazy. It's a big monster. But yeah, he ends up hiding in a locker because nothing really truly monstrous happens in this episode. I mean, how could it? It's a space station full of babies. The only way that they could have made this really dark is if the Goblin King turned up. But yeah, that's horrible. Why am I even saying that? And here we get to one of the most shocking and most harrowing twists of the story. The fact that the bogeyman is literally a bogeyman. It is comprised entirely of human snot. The education program went haywire and created a literal story for children, and because the children need stories for mental stimulation, we all know that, but it took the idea of having to have a bogeyman in that story very literally, so literally created a monster made of snot. Integral, dignified science fiction, ladies and gentlemen. That's funny, isn't it? It's a big snot monster. And they don't even kill the bogey beast or anything. Like, Jocelyn tries to flush it out the airlock because she despises the fact that this monstrous creature is trying to attack all these lovely children, but just as it is getting flushed out, the Doctor draws a parallel and sees this creature as being similar to him because they are both the only one of their kind. So he makes the bold Doctor Who move of jumping in the airlock while it's getting sucked out into the vacuum and then closing the door and saving the creature, and there is your happy ending. No strings attached. The babies make friends of the bogey beast. The nanny has this lovely affectionate relationship with the babies where she actually cuddles the babies and she's not hiding in a cupboard anymore, so all's well that ends well. As a bonus, the Doctor realises that the space station is stationary because there is a build-up of methane due to 6 years worth of crappy nappies. So he flushes the methane out of the ship and off it goes. So, just to recap, there is a ship full of babies, they are scared of a monster made of snot, and in the end the ship farts to reach its home. I mean, the real dramatic glue that holds this episode together is the recurring conversations that the Doctor has with Ruby Sunday about where she came from originally. She was abandoned by a church on Ruby Road, and there is a mysterious person in a gown that the Doctor sees in some kind of all too real phase in and out of reality vision. And what is more bizarre is when Ruby thinks back to this memory of her being a baby outside of a church on Ruby Road and it is snowing, it then begins to snow in the actual time and space where she is reliving that memory. almost like she is controlling the reality around her. And this happens twice. Once on the space station and again in the TARDIS right at the end when the Doctor is scanning her to find out who she truly is. And there is one of the many mysteries of this series. Very interesting. I mean, I was worried that this is gonna play out like it's another bad wolf or it's another impossible girl. We've seen that so many times, you know. It's a kind of time loop. The Doctor made this thing happen because it was a loopy, whiny... You know, it's just that again. But this implies that it is something different. And I highly doubt that Russell T, in all his wisdom, would repeat the same trope that he himself started back in the Bad Wolf days of Rose Tyler. So the fact that she can do this is a whole new dimension to the mystery. It turns it on its head. These elements to the mystery of Ruby Sunday, coupled with the fact that the Doctor himself is also an orphan who doesn't know who his parents are, as introduced in the Chibnall era, added to this story of the babies who are pining for their parents and guardians and just want to get to their real home, all binds these characters together in one thematic concept that is introduced right at the start when the Doctor explains that he is the only one of his kind, through to the end of him trying to find out who Ruby Sunday's real heritage is. All kind of makes this a very tightly bound and tightly woven story where it is funny, it is jovial, it is silly, it is extremely light-hearted and extremely aimed for children in one sense, but also bound by this tragic undercurrent that runs consistently all the way through. So I can officially state, by my reckoning, that this episode has a clear and consistent personality of its own. It's light-hearted, funny and entertaining with a consistent undercurrent of tragedy. Now, was I entertained by it? Well, there's only so much entertainment I can get personally from a story about talking babies. I'm sorry, that's just kind of, you know, where my head is at. I'm a 42-year-old man. I like the bonkers, silly irreverence that this Doctor Who is bound to deliver. But there is a kind of CBBC aspect to this that just doesn't really appeal to me personally, and that is the subjective element to this criticism, is that even though I found it to be a very tightly woven episode and mechanically a very good episode, the atmosphere and the tone of it kind of fell flat on me personally. It wasn't really my cup of tea. I mean, do I like the idea of a space station that looks like it has a massive rear end and it farts to get going? Yes, I do like that. I think that's brilliant. But the rest of it, it's not the kind of Doctor Who that I am gunning for. However, I have yet to watch this episode with my family, and I will watch it with my family, and I am very excited to watch it vicariously via my entire family at a tea time traditional Doctor Who family setting. I watched it in bed this morning with my headphones on my laptop like a lonely hermit, and maybe that was part of the problem. But everyone has a different relationship with Doctor Who, and everyone watches it in different ways, in different capacities. Everyone has the stuff that they love and that they don't love, and it's all about different flavours of ice cream. So even though it didn't really land with me personally, that is purely my subjective response to a bunch of talking babies. And there you go. I don't think there is a great deal more that I can add to my critique of this. I'm sure I missed something down the line, and maybe my opinion of this will change over time, and if it does, then that's fine, because Doctor Who generally does kind of do that as well. And in the meantime, I am extremely excited about these woven mysteries that are going to play into later episodes, which will bring me nicely onto the Devil's Court, which I have seen and I will tell you my thoughts on that in my next video, which will be dropping extremely soon. In the meantime, forget everything I said. I want you to get in the comments and tell me what you thought of Space Babies. And while you are there, please don't forget to hit me up on Patreon, the thing that keeps me going on my channel. For just £1 a month, you can become a distinguished follower, where you can hit me up in the direct messaging or in the comments of the articles I've posted on Patreon and request something Doctor Who related for me to review. I was initially just reviewing classic stories, but then people started coming in with other things like documentaries and obscure Big Finish villains, all of which I will get to one after another. So please hit me up and request anything you like Doctor Who related that you want me to talk about. I would love to see you there. So visit patreon.com/chosenchimp, distinguished follower, £1 a month. So that is it from me, the Chosen Chimp, in this video, and I hope you are having a great time whatever it is you are doing, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, have a good one.